Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, July 19th, 2017. Time for another show, regardless of whether you're ready or not, regardless of whether I'm ready or not. Kids in place for the beginning part of the day. Basketball camp accomplished. Very narrowly missed destroying the opening of the show, but we got back in place just in time. Justice, thank you very much for standing by all the way out there on the West Coast to make sure everything operates smoothly, whether we make it back from basketball drop-offs in time or not. May take a day off from the basketball camp tomorrow. Apparently it's been a rough week. As you get older, of course, not like you and me, but as you get older as a kid, basketball, yeah, it does get rougher and rougher. And good education in the physicality of the game this week, but I'm not sure he's having as much fun as he usually does in basketball camp, and I'm sorry to hear that. Plus, he's got two games at the end of the week, Thursday evening, Friday evening, some games. Maybe we'll give him a day off from the jostling and bruising and tooth losing, as a matter of fact, of this week. There was a loose tooth involved anyway. It's not like he got smacked in the mouth and the thing just came out. It's, the teeth that are supposed to come out. Everything's okay. It's just a rough week. It's a rough week for everybody. It's a rough week for basketball players in the youth leagues and the basketball camps. It's a rough week for President of the United States. There's a guy and wacky orange clown who claims that that's his job, and he's having a hell of a time of it this week, and so he should. We'll catch up with everything that we can cram into today's show and hopefully visit with Joan McCarter in the last half of the show to catch up on the goings-on in Congress. And there are plenty, just none of them involve legislative accomplishments. We'll catch up with all of that. Daily Co's Radio is live now, as Bill reminds us, all the way from Portland, Maine, each morning. Daily Co's Radio is live. Kagro X, that's me, David Waldman. Hi, everybody. How you doing? Listening on podcast, listening on Netroots Radio, listening in Rochester, listening in Washington, D.C. on the old-fashioned radio dial thing. Thanks for joining us. Today we'll be unveiling the latest GOP health plan, Pence Care, where mother takes care of your boo-boos. Thanks, Bill. That might as well be the case. And, I think we're waking up to this morning's news being treason care still dead for the time being. Of course, any of these things can come back. They've defied all the usual operating standards so far, and really, there's no reason why it can't come back in this or some other form. I'm actually a little bit curious as to why Trump didn't, at some point, just pull the rug out from underneath the Republicans in Congress and declare the bill dead himself and send them back to the drawing board once he found out how bad the contents of the bill really were. And at some point he did it may have just been too late in the process. He really has been so disengaged from this process that I guess that really explains why this never happened. I thought at some point it would get through to him that this bill was a disaster, that it was full of tax cuts for the rich, which I'm sure he likes because he would get those tax cuts, but he campaigned against. And, of course, to the extent he said anything about what he was going to do about health care, and I don't know. I mean, I really shouldn't even give him a pass on this. He said nothing. All he did was he went around the country telling people, we're going to do something great. I don't know what it is, but it's going to be great. We're going to have such beautiful health care, and it's going to be so easy. People digging up all the quotes from Twitter and his travels across the country, and of course they're horribly embarrassing. But the upshot of it is that he didn't know what he was going to do, but he was pretty interested in promising people your premiums will go down and you'll get better care and more people will be covered. And all of the opposite stuff came out of this bill because it wasn't really built to be a health care bill. It was built to be a basis for a tax cut and very little else. And at best, it would be what conservative Republicans were calling, by way of disguising it, Medicaid reform. It was, in fact, just giant Medicaid cuts, and it was going to throw the very poorest people back into, well, it was going to keep them in poverty, plus take away any chance they had at taking care of their health along the way. And I thought there was some chance that he might come to realize just how bad this was. And not that he's terribly interested in living up to his word or delivering on promises. But I thought there was some chance, not because he's a good guy, but because he's a jerk and he doesn't care about anybody, including his own team. I thought he might say, well, I really, I didn't know what in the world I was going to do or how in the world we were going to do it, but I really did think that we would use some kind of magic and have a plan that would be better and cheaper. Because, of course, I spent the last 6-7 years insisting that Obama had done it all wrong and there was a million different ways to do this better, and he picked the absolute worst, and it's a disaster. It should be easy. And he kept saying it was going to be easy to redesign a healthcare system whereby everybody would have coverage and it would be cheaper than it was now, and the coverage would be better and the care would be better. And I thought that there was some chance that he would be startled by the fact that that was not being delivered in the bill. Instead, I think he took the lazy way out and just allowed people to tell him that is what we're delivering, even though everyone knew that it wasn't, and he just stuck by that. But I thought, again, there was some chance that he would say, actually, this bill is terrible, and he would simply say, no, you guys in the Congress have got it all wrong. You did it wrong. I'm not going to sign this bill the way it is. Go back to the drawing board and design me up the thing I asked for. Better care, cheaper costs, better coverage, everybody healthy, everybody covered, everybody can afford it. Give me that. Now, it's not possible to deliver that, but he doesn't care about that, and it would imperil his Republican members of Congress, but he also doesn't care about that. I really did think there was some chance that he would just say something ridiculous like that, and then all his fans, some of whom are only nominally Republicans or who are nominally willing to go out and vote for Republicans in races other than the presidency, would say, yay, he's our hero. He's serious about doing it right, even though it would in fact be a sign that he's absolutely not serious about doing anything, right or wrong. But he didn't take that opportunity because that would have, I guess, required him to pay attention to what was going on and adopt a position based on facts, things that were actually happening in the legislative process, and that's too complicated for him, so he never even made it to that point. It's really actually a little surprising. I didn't think he was going to study the details of anything, but I thought he might read the news somewhere. I know he doesn't read news, or see it on television, and I guess that's the problem with watching only Fox News, is you end up buying your own hype, essentially. The Republicans were busy with the job of telling everyone that this was a good bill, and then he saw that on television and I guess came to believe it. I really don't know why they couldn't prevent that from happening, but I guess it just has to do with his being an extraordinarily stupid man, as well as a gimmitarian. All right. So let's catch up on a few of the details on this and other healthcare issues and other issues of staffing the administration. I am reminded by seeing his tweet go by that he has decided on an ambassador to Russia, which is, I guess we've all been anticipating that he would name somebody eventually, although I don't know whether he even thinks he needs an ambassador to Russia. But he came up with the name of John Huntsman this time around, although I guess he tweeted it out last night as John, John Huntsman. I don't know whether he tweeted it or it went out as a press release or whatever, and of course he spells his name just Jon, and remarkably poor standards once again at the White House. But it's awfully hard to care about details and getting things right if Donald Trump is your president. I mean, what's the point in working hard to proofread something? I'm going to have trouble telling my kids to do their homework, and I have had that trouble since November. I was unable to tell them that it was worth anything to stay in school and become a smart person. I just had to tell you got to trust me that we're not going to have a moron for president all the time. Not every moron can simply walk into the White House. So you really do have to work hard and get decent grades in life going forward, regardless of the fact that this idiot is president. You'll find, quite frankly, growing up, that a good percentage of your presidents are going to be idiots. Not quite this dumb, but it does happen. It doesn't mean that you get off the hook and you can't do what he would do, like point to the president and say, well, the president's dumb, so I can be dumb too. That, I don't know, that only works if you inherit $200 million, I guess, and maybe not even then. Anyway, so he named John Huntsman as his ambassador to Russia, which is a little confusing on a number of fronts, not the least of which, of course, is the last mention that I think he made of John Huntsman in a public setting anyway, comes from the tweet that was very quickly dug up, and it's very true that there's already a Donald Trump tweet perfect for every occasion out there. His archives are a goldmine. The one that was dug up yesterday was from February 8th, 2012, I guess the last time he was considering running for president and backed out. And he got this tweet out at that point. John Huntsman, whose name he spelled correctly at the time, called to see me. I said no. He gave away our country to China. You know how he says China. Of course, John Huntsman was ambassador to China during the Obama administration, was also briefly a candidate for president in 2012. I guess Huntsman was calling on Trump to see whether he was really going to run, and if not, could he have his support back before everyone knew exactly, like precisely how dumb and crazy he was. He surprised us all a little bit with his 2016 run. Anyway, he said no, he didn't want to talk to or see John Huntsman because he had, as he said in his tweet, given the country away to China. And, of course, now he's naming him ambassador to Russia, which I can only assume is, as most people have observed, because he wants to give the United States away to Russia, and John Huntsman's good at giving the country away to whoever he serves as ambassador. So I suppose that's what's happening. It's just kind of funny to see, happening in real time. And it's actually a little bit of it provides a little explanation as to why I thought it was possible that he might just walk away from the health care bill at the end. Like, being consistent has never interested him. So it wouldn't bother him in the least, just as it doesn't bother him now to name John Huntsman ambassador to Russia. It wouldn't embarrass him to walk away from the bill and say, this isn't the bill that I promised. Even if it had been the bill that he had promised, he might still walk away from it and not be embarrassed in the least. Let's see. There was something else that reminded me of, and I've already forgotten it along the way. But, oh yes, right. Foreign policy issues. Turns out that at the G20, which I don't know if you know this, very few people know this, but there are 20 countries at the G20, which, I didn't even know. I couldn't fit, why was there no hint? I think it's really extraordinary how that worked out, don't you? I mean, that's a very big word for me to use there, but I got to the G20 and I found out there were 20 countries. How appropriate. Not all of them started with G. I did notice that. Anyway, at the G20, we already knew about his 2-hour plus, I think, right? Sit down with Vladimir Putin, which was scheduled, but it wasn't scheduled to go on for 2 hours. Everyone was a little bit concerned about how chummy they seemed to be and how long they spent together, but okay, fine, whatever. As it turns out, though, there was a second sort of semi-secret, off-the-record, nobody knows what happened meeting for an hour during what I think was supposed to be the closing dinner among the world leaders gathered at the G20. From what I understand, the leaders were paired up in some fashion. I don't know what the seating layout actually was, but they were paired up in some way to have, I guess, dinner conversation or whatever. And he was paired with the Prime Minister of Japan, Shinzo Abe. Is that right? And he had hosted him at Mar-a-Lago, so I guess they probably thought it was going to be a good pairing. But true to form, Trump leaves his date, essentially, and walks over and just sits down with Vladimir Putin instead. I don't know who Putin was teamed up with, who he was supposed to sit with. That being the G20, there were an even number of world leaders there. I don't know who got up and left a seat empty, but Donald Trump slipped himself into it just the way Ivanka slipped into his chair earlier during the G20 meeting. And they sat down side by side and had an hour-long chat. Thing is, nobody knows from our side what happened during that chat because he didn't take any staff with him. Apparently, this is supposed to be sort of an intimate setting, and the two leaders sit down, and where necessary, there would be official translators. But because he had been paired up, Trump had been paired up with the Prime Minister of Japan, they had provided him with a translator as between Japanese and English, not an English-Russian translator, and so all the translation, as became necessary, was provided by Putin's translator. I don't know who Putin was scheduled to meet with, but in all likelihood, most of those Russian I'm surprised that they didn't have somebody who was multilingual with them, but I guess if you're taking an Asian languages expert, they might not have not necessarily have Russian on their resume. But I guess a lot of Russian translate. English seems like a pretty common additional language to throw in there. So anyway, he sat down with him for an hour or so, and there were no Americans, no members of our national security team, nobody to keep him in check, nobody to make sure he wasn't giving away the store. I don't know how much... he is president of the United States, and I suppose if he cuts some kind of a deal, an informal agreement to do something, he can get that something done. It's not quite like going in there unauthorized and then coming out and saying, I'm going to fight the entire establishment, and who knows who's going to get in my way, and all sorts of branches of the government can get in the way of my effecting my will single-handedly here. But the president has an advantage in a lot of those contests. So we may never have any idea what comes out of there except what the Russians tell us. And just like the first meeting, we have no way of knowing whether any of the things Trump tells us about it are true. You should go with the assumption that they are not, just as I don't think anybody believes that he pressed Putin very hard on the question of Russian interference in our elections during his official meeting. I doubt very much whether that came up again. And, I don't know. We'll have to see what sort of specifics are out there by way of outrage about it versus sort of this inchoate fear of having this dummy sit down with the very sly Vladimir Putin. I don't know what they could agree to. I don't know what they could arrange. I don't know that Trump knew what to give away, unless it was just giving a bunch of instructions about who to fire before they start investigating you, or who to be, who has to be spirited out of the country, or, I don't know, thrown down a well, for that matter. We know that Putin would likely deal with the burgeoning Russia scandal. It would be not much of a scandal for him because he's Russian, you see, but had it been an American scandal, he deals with scandals very differently so far than Trump has been able to, but I guess that could change. Maybe the whole meeting was about encouraging him to be more autocratic in all of that. I don't know. We may never find out. Okay, let's see. What else have we to share with you today? There is the news, of course, of the continued reporting of the death of Treason Care, and I think that probably will stick as far as the bill in its current form anyway, but always a possibility that they might try to revive the thing. Rumors circulating that McConnell may insist on a vote, even a vote that he knows he's going to lose. Anyway, for what reason, I'm not entirely sure. I assume that he feels like it's important to deliver on the promise of holding the vote, and maybe he is thinking of using the vote to hold Republican senators' feet to the fire with respect to the campaign promises they've made over the years, though they've made them largely at the insistence of Mitch McConnell himself. And I don't really know what he thinks he's going to get out of it, unless he thinks that it's good punishment for people like Dean Heller. Good point made the other day by Dana Hool on Twitter, by the way. I didn't put this one aside, but it just reminds me of of the fact that he made this observation. Heller never actually came out and took a final position, one way or the other, on the bill as it was previously set to go to the floor this week, and then the bill died without his coming out against it, which means it's still a live issue in the campaign against Heller come next year to say the guy was on board with this terrible health care bill, and he may just as easily be blamed for it, despite the fact that he was hemming and hawing. He never came out and said no. He left that job to other people, and that's going to hurt him, I think, in 2018. Or at least I hope so. It ought to. We'll see whether this sort of thing sticks with him. So lots of stories about what Mitch McConnell intends to do next, whether he's going to hold a symbolic vote and watch it all go down, and lots of writing on the newly discovered, the new revelation that he is, in fact, not that great of a tactician, and maybe not the master of the Senate, or at least not the master of the members of the Senate anyway. Let's see. There are a couple of entries on that front. Ryan Grimm has one in his new home over at The Intercept, which he emailed around yesterday and sort of introduced with a paragraph or two in his email that are, I think, not included in the piece, but which I thought were of some particular interest. And I might share with you, and I think it's probably okay, given that it was an email to his large network, his list. It wasn't any kind of personal email to me, so I think it's fair game to share it. Before I dive into that, though, let's see. There's a couple of comments from folks listening this morning. Hi, how you doing? Good morning. How are you? Let me share those. Michael Musson saying, let's see, I predict that after some period of time, the Affordable Care Act is still doing well and Trump takes credit for it under his stewardship. That's a possibility, too. He could absolutely just switch directions on that front. It's a good guess. Way to put the marker out there. Let's see. On another front, Mad Hatter noting for us that Trump is still plans to go after Jeff Flake with his millions of dollars, that is Trump's alleged millions of dollars, or whatever he can raise from other people to target him. I guess that's still on the agenda, even though whatever. Okay, we'll just leave it out there. There's not much more we can do in the way of analysis of that. He just gets chips on his shoulder, and that's what he's going to do. Kate Sherrill sharing this tweet from Bill Scher. The government is going to shut down because Republicans didn't do their homework. Oh, well, that's an interesting thing, and it's got a Politico story attached to it. Let's open that up and set it aside. We might as well check in on that one. The next looming crisis. Oh, Patrick McHenry is in this picture, too. So they really don't know what they're doing if Patrick McHenry is your photo. Anyway, turning back to Ryan Grimm and his postmortem on McConnell, he was introducing his piece in email with these remarks. Last night, after a handful of Senate Republicans publicly killed Mitch McConnell's repeal and replace bill, liberals around the country had a similar thought all at the same time. This must be some sort of trick. Surely the great Senate tactician McConnell is pulling some clever maneuver when nobody's looking. He'll sneak repeal right past everybody. And people had the wounds of the House fight where the bill died only to come alive again, reminding them that anything is possible. And then, of course, there was election night, which has thrown off everyone's equilibrium for a generation. But there's reason to believe that dead really means dead this time. For one, McConnell admitted as much today. He was forced into that admission by 3 Senate Republicans, all of them women, incidentally, and lots of people have been taking special note of that, who told him his latest plan to straight up repeal was a non-starter. Now, that doesn't mean Republicans will stop trying to roll back the essence of health care reform, which amounts to subsidies and tighter regulation of insurers. Indeed, Social Security was passed in 1934 and is still under assault today. Quite true. But its broad framework is accepted as a part of our national fabric, and that's the territory the ACA moved into today. McConnell, though, has dealt himself a bad hand. By running on repeal for 3 straight cycles, he was forced to try to do it through reconciliation, which meant that he was limited in what kind of policy he could pursue. Certain things require 60 votes, which he doesn't have. He was asked today what he would tell the GOP base after failing to deliver on years of promises. His answer, well, we have a new Supreme Court justice. Yeah, well, that does sting, since we could have had the one we wanted, but we were just chicken. We didn't know, we did know how bad the Republicans were really going to be, but nobody believed us, so we didn't pull the ultimate nuclear trick on at the first available opportunity, while we still had Joe Biden as president of the Senate. You know what I'm talking about, and you know it would have worked. Anyway, these are interesting comments. This is even before we get to Ryan's piece. Something that's been in the back of my mind for a long time, and I keep thinking I should bring up when I discuss this stuff with Greg every morning. But as you know, I can't bring anything up when we talk with Greg, unless he takes a sip of coffee or stops for a breath. There's no way in. But it's background information. It wasn't something I wanted to disturb his flow for. But it's occurred to me, like, I don't know, 3 times during his various reports on the various stages of their attempts at a health care bill, even though they never really came up with one. And that was quite just that observation that I think Ryan finally laid out here, that I don't know if I bought into as a strategy during the run up to the passage of the Affordable Care Act. It was explicitly expressed by a lot of the proponents of the bill that the idea was, as tough as these votes were and as much venom as there was behind the opposition, and it made this seem unlikely because of all that venom, the idea always was that you were providing a very basic benefit to a lot of people that was going to be a lot of help to them and become an integral part of their lives. And it's true. I still don't think we did a great job selling the plan. I don't think we did a great job telling everybody what the success of the plan really was, or even really what the heart of the plan itself really was. I think it's, by now I've come to understand it. I think, my best understanding of it. And that's not to say that that's the only understanding or even a good one, and others don't have better ones, but I finally came to understand the plan as, look, the things that are most confusing and most horrible about insurance, we all know what they are, and we might not be able to list them off the top of our heads, but if someone else listed them, we'd all nod our heads and say, yeah, that is, so it's one of the horrible things. And maybe you hadn't run into the pre-existing condition problem before, but once you heard about it, it was very easy to understand and very easy to believe that insurance companies did do this. And the horror stories made sense. But even if you never really had a particularly bad horror story like that, you certainly ran into the situation of choosing a plan. Even if you had really good insurance coverage as part of your benefits package at work, if you ever had to go through if you had any choice at all about who was insuring you or about which plan you would buy, and not everybody who has employer-provided health insurance does have any option at all, but if you do, if you ever had to go through the open season, if you were, say, a federal employee and you had a wide selection of carriers to choose from, or if you were just an employee where the employer said, look, Aetna provides our insurance, period. That's your coverage, but you have some options about what to do each year, say. You can, of course, enroll in our premium style plan here where we, what would be like a gold level plan, or they had options. You could get into the preferred provider network, or you could get into the HMO cheaper plan where you didn't have as much choice of doctors. et cetera, et cetera. And there were also variations. I know, like, for instance, my wife's insurance, there's options for putting away pre-tax money each year that has to be spent on health care. And if you don't use it, you lose it. But in the end, you save an awful lot of money on your taxes by putting away pre-tax money for it. And it encourages you to scramble at the end of the year, essentially, and make sure that you've had your eye exam or get an extra checkup or go to the dentist or take care of something that you were putting off because you got your use it or lose it situation coming up. You know, those are some fancy variations that you have out there, but everybody's got choices to make, and it's a huge headache. And one of the huge headaches that preceded the Affordable Care Act, and I think the one that was perhaps most widespread, especially among the individual insurance market, was how can I tell what I'm buying here when there's so much fine print and so much of it is in legalese and gobbledygook, and they're trying. The whole point of the thing is to try to hide the ball from you so that you don't realize that the lower priced plans really don't cover very much. And sometimes things are ambiguous. Sometimes things are explicitly stated because they've been sued over those things in the past and lost, and they need to state them more explicitly so they don't have to deal with that expense. But a lot of people had that problem of checking into their insurance coverage either each year or whenever they were re-enrolling or whatever, or changing their insurance, and finding out, you know, that lower cost plan just doesn't cover a whole lot, or at least I don't think so. And I'm not sure. And does it cover the, I prefer this treatment? And how do I know if I'm switching plans? Sometimes you have no way of knowing. I take a particular medication. Maybe this provider doesn't cover that medication, but my old one did, or I want to go to this kind of doctor and they don't cover that. It was a huge nightmare. And if you were thinking of starting a family, you had to make sure, of course, that there was maternity coverage and child visits for the kids once they're born, and all the regular things that you would think that a normal person would think. Look, if I'm paying all this money to a health insurance company, I'm covered, right? And they were finding out, no, you're not. And that was the biggest nightmare of shopping for insurance, and the biggest nightmare everybody had about finding out at the wrong moment, the worst possible moment, that they weren't covered for things that really, honestly, look, I bought health insurance. How could I not be covered for this? And the biggest advantage, the most amazing thing I thought about the Affordable Care Act was that it said, look, if you go shopping for insurance from now on, especially if you go onto one of our exchanges, you're guaranteed that whatever the price is, whatever you're paying, whatever you can afford, and even if you can't afford it, whatever you're paying, I mean, you'll get insurance that's pretty much what you expected at the end of this. It might not, thrill you to death, but there will be no question that if you're pregnant and you go to the doctor, that's covered. They'll take care of you. No surprises about, we'll take care of you if you have bubonic plague. Yes, but that's because we thought nobody had that anymore. We definitely cover smallpox, but we don't cover pregnancy. What? How could that be the case? Well, that was no longer the case. And of course, all the stuff about pre-existing conditions and many more of the things that the bill included and eliminated a lot of nightmares. But just the simple headache, forget the nightmares, the headache of, does my insurance cover the stuff that health insurance really, common sense-wise, ought to cover? And the answer was, thanks to the Affordable Care Act, yes. You no longer had to worry about that. Prices were not as low as they had been for insurance that didn't cover that stuff, but who cares? You wanted to be covered, that's the price of it. So that was the big advantage of it, and I don't know. And I guess we got mired in the whole, if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor, which was nominally supposed to be true in that you could, if you wanted to, buy a plan that enabled you to keep your own doctor. Or if you couldn't afford that plan, you could sell your house and buy that plan. Or, of course, obviously there were some subsidies available too, and quite generous ones at that. But it didn't solve every problem. And we ended up having to answer for that line when people found out that a reasonably priced plan just didn't really always offer you the option of going to the same provider, and we never probably should have said that, but it hardly mattered in the sense that you were being offered something eminently sensible and understandable anyway, and that was quite an accomplishment for everybody in the country. And yes, there were things that were even bigger and by far more important in the grand scheme of things to the country as a whole, like Medicaid expansion. That's what really brought people, into the healthcare fold who couldn't afford it before. But this was rather ingenious in hindsight. I mean, there's certainly lots that could be wished for and that you might be able to design better. But in the end, one, engineering the passage of the thing, and two, engineering a program that was basically something that would get rid of the biggest question marks in insurance shopping and make shopping on the private capitalist controlled, yes, consumer market for healthcare something less than a nightmare for once. Was a pretty big accomplishment. And Republicans were looking to wipe that out. That should be a pretty powerful message. Of course, it's a lot worse message was available to us because they instead insisted that you're not going to be able to get any kind of coverage whatsoever, period, and lots, millions of the poorest Americans will go back to being healthcare paupers and dying prematurely and suffering from conditions that are eminently treatable and were being treated for a little while. Anyway, I was just sort of, I guess to get back to the original point of all this, after this sort of effusive semi-praise for the Affordable Care Act, was that I didn't really buy into the notion that Americans were going to so quickly become attached to, so appreciative of the structure of the Affordable Care Act. And they did. And the authors of it were counting on that to save it from the early repeal efforts. And I didn't think that was necessarily going to work. There was so much negativity surrounding the campaign to pass the thing and so much poison in our politics as a result of Tea Party and Republican, same thing, resistance to the bill, mostly because it was being offered by Democrats and Obama in particular, that I didn't really know how long it would take to catch on and to stick like that. And I thought, well, they'll probably get the opportunity to reverse things, whether that's repeal it entirely or not, within the window of, I would say, a decade or so that it would take to really become attached to, really become used to the presence of the Affordable Care Act. And it happened a lot more quickly and a lot more effectively than I thought, although I probably should have given them more credit by realizing earlier on there was so much that was terrible about the way the market was operating prior to the Affordable Care Act. It really wouldn't take a great deal of attachment necessarily to the Affordable Care Act to oppose its repeal. It would just require memory of what it used to be like. This amounts to the same thing, but as a matter of framing in people's minds, I guess it was important that they be able to recognize the advantage of having the Affordable Care Act, even if they didn't want to grant any credit to President Obama or Democrats for having created it. You see what I'm getting around to? It's a long way of saying that I think this stuff has really, I want to give credit to the strategists who came up with that. I mean, it wasn't something that they had to invent out of whole cloth. They just had a gut feeling that it would happen. And I thought it would take a lot longer and be a lot less effective. And they really seem to have hit the nail on the head. And it might be what saves the lives of the millions of people who have come to depend on the Affordable Care Act in the end. All right. Well, anyway, I was going to then launch into Ryan Grimm's story about McConnell's failure in all of this, and I may just go ahead and do that. Armando may also join us along the way, whether about this or any other subject, but I think the era of considering McConnell some sort of tactician genius, tactical genius, or magician may be coming to a close. Here's the story from Ryan Grimm, and it starts out just this way. Perhaps Mitch McConnell is no magician after all. And it's certainly beginning to look that way. Let's see. I already had this open. Okay. Let's get to it. Mitch McConnell has run out of excuses for not accomplishing anything, is Ryan's title. Mitch McConnell became leader of Senate Republicans at the precise moment it stopped mattering. It was January 3rd, 2007, and Democrats had just swept both the House and Senate in a wave election that was a thorough rejection of the GOP in Washington. Even though the Bush administration had 2 years left, McConnell would be doing no governing from the minority during that time. Next came the election of Barack Obama, and McConnell's now famous decision to oppose anything his administration offered, with as much solidarity as could be mustered. With only 40 members to keep in line, he kept his conference largely together, though one glaring exception was losing Pennsylvania's Arlen Specter, not just on the stimulus, but as a Republican altogether. In April of 2009, Specter became a Democrat, giving the party 59 senators, and when Al Franken was finally sworn in July, something they attempted to steal from us quite brazenly last time around, and we seem to have forgotten about. Following the endless recount, of course, Democrats briefly held a filibuster-proof majority. The question now is whether Specter was the exception that proved the rule of McConnell's skill in leadership or a forecast of things to come. After 3 unsuccessful cycles, McConnell finally took back the upper chamber in 2014, but still did no governing, operating instead as an opposition party would in a parliamentary system. Just how ingrained that thinking came through in a revealing comment from House Speaker Paul Ryan after his failure to repeal the Affordable Care Act. Moving from an opposition party to a governing party comes with some growing pains, said Ryan, whose party had controlled the House for 6 years by that point. And, well, we're feeling those growing pains today. After Ryan pulled the original House ACA repeal from the floor, McConnell had a spring in his step as he addressed reporters. Sorry that didn't work out, he offered. He was, of course, anything but sorry. For a brief moment, he thought he had dodged his own bullet. After campaigning for 6 years on repealing Obamacare, the hope was that the failed House effort would be enough and the Senate could move on to the business of tax reform. But the House bill came back to life, and the lower chamber passed the politically toxic potato across the Capitol to the Senate. The House bill was never designed to become law, and it's anything but clear that McConnell made a real effort to make it one. A decisive number of Republican senators from states that had expanded Medicaid, many of whom really are facing a cataclysmic opioid problem, many of which is what he actually wrote, and he was in fact correct. I thought he was talking about the senators, he's talking about the states. Though I suspect some of these senators may also be facing opioid problems. Anyway, those senators from those states were nervous about slashing the program. Leadership made a strategic choice to side with conservatives on Medicaid from the outset, and that undermined just about any chance of them securing widespread support from key moderates, as though there were any. Said one Senate Republican aide, who wasn't authorized to speak on the record. To mollify the moderates, McConnell told them that the cuts would never actually happen, as Congress has a way of punting tough decisions like that in perpetuity. His comment was leaked, and Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin stunningly charged McConnell with a breach of trust for the suggestion. This was the same Johnson that McConnell and the Koch brothers abandoned for dead in July of 2016, presuming that he'd lose his race to Russ Feingold. He was down by 9 points at the time, but Johnson pulled off an upset and now haunts McConnell. On Monday night, the 2 GOP senators, 2 of them anyway, Mike Lee and Jerry Moran of Utah and Kansas, respectively, announced simultaneously they'd block McConnell's bill from coming up for a vote, McConnell's snake of obstruction finally devouring its own tail. McConnell on Monday night floated a new plan. The Senate would vote on repeal with no replacement. On Tuesday, 3 moderate women in McConnell's conference said they would block that vote, too. I did not come to Washington to hurt people, West Virginia's Shelley Moore Capito said. Yeah, I didn't know if you know this, but you're here as a Republican. But okay, you probably think that, and whatever. Nice try. 3 is enough to kill it. Of of course, we're toast, as Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina put it to reporters on Tuesday. At a lunch meeting, Tuesday, the regular Tuesday lunch meeting, White House Chief of Staff Reince Priebus showed up only to duck out and hide behind a trash can. An embedded tweet here from MJ Lee showing him trying to find a quiet spot to take a phone call. As the meeting dragged on, Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky emerged and took the microphones that were waiting for McConnell, taunting his fellow Republicans with their past votes for repeal. Senator Pat Roberts, Moran's colleague from Kansas, pretended to take a phone call from President Trump, who was too busy calling for the filibuster to be abolished, apparently under the mistaken impression that he needed 60 votes, not 50, to pass repeal. He's that dumb, by the way, ladies and gentlemen. "Hello, Mr. President," Roberts said into the phone as reporters laughed. "Well, the better approach is just to get the hell out of here," he advised to the pretend president. A subdued McConnell emerged later. "My suspicion is there'll be hearings about the crisis we have, and then we'll have to see what the way forward is," he said. Now he's planning to have hearings on this whole thing. Okay. A reporter asked what he would tell the public about a wasted 7 months, never mind 7 years, and broken campaign promises. McConnell corrected him. It had only been 6 months, and we confirmed Neil Gorsuch. "Well, we have a new Supreme Court justice. We have 14 repeals of regulation, and we're only 6 months into it. The last time I looked, Congress goes on for 2 years. We'll be moving on to comprehensive tax reform and infrastructure," he said. "There is much work left to be done for the American people, and we're ready to tackle it." McConnell also promised to vote in the very near future on the doomed attempt to repeal much of Obamacare with no replacement. So still stuck on that idea. And that wraps it up for Ryan Grimm. I think that's a pretty good summary of where we stand. Armando, if you were interested in jumping in and batting something around for a little while, you're certainly welcome to do so. Joan's been listening, has sent me along. I think I already do have this open somewhere, but let's make sure we have it available. Should I just wait for Joan? I know she wants us to discuss it, but all right, well, we'll free her up to discuss that and other things, maybe by at least summarizing it, just to bring out the point here. There is a piece at Daily Kos. Joan saw the same thing, basically. Did Republicans underestimate the difficulty of Trump care or overestimate the abilities of McConnell? And that's exactly the way the question needs to be formulated at this point. And it's probably a little bit of both, but you can't do too much in the way of reminding people that you might be overestimating McConnell's abilities. I still hold out a little bit of worry that I thought it was more of a possibility yesterday, less so today, that he might be able to find a way to get an agreement on getting his majority vote for a motion to proceed based on some whatever particular plan he's able to lay out that would cobble together the 50 votes that he would need. And then just switch at the end. Once he got his motion to proceed passed, he might just roll out an amendment that was one of the previously rejected plans and try and see whether he can shame Senate Republicans into doing something with it now that it was on the floor. And that does sometimes change the dynamics. But I don't know. I guess he's just as happy to back off and let the thing either wither and die, or I don't know what, or maybe to see if he can lay the blame at the feet of the White House for a change instead. Anyway, since we're on the subject, might as well bring in Joan. I've got her piece open, and better than having the piece open, we've got Joan here. So, hi, Joan. How you doing?
Hi, Kagro. I'm good. How are you?
I'm okay. Things are going along. It's summer. I'm happy to find out
I share
this news.
your fear.
Yes.
That he talks these people into giving him his motion to proceed, letting it get to the floor, and then doing anything with an amendment. Putting any old thing in there.
Yes. I think it's entirely possible. Although it's also still possible that he'd be just as happy to see the whole thing die. It's hard to read him on this bill. I mean, you would think he'd have some pride and authorship in it, but it's so terrible. I can't believe that anybody really would have that.
I mean,
I don't know. So I'm not so sure, but it may just be that he'd be willing to accept as a win on a motion to proceed, and then say, well, we let the Senate work its will, and the will wasn't there for the repeal, but I promised you that there would be a vote, and here it is, so I delivered. And that may be all he cares about.
That might be all he cares about. But I also think, enough people have talked about the possibility of McConnell pulling some kind of trick like that, that at least a handful of senators would be wary of that too.
Yeah, well, that's why it was
probably
smart.
be the handful that are already saying no, they're not going to vote on this motion to proceed.
Yeah. I was glad to see very early on that was the way people were phrasing their opposition, and saying, instead of the generally useless, I oppose the bill as currently written. Well, okay, fine, but they kind of amend almost everything.
Right.
So that's usually pretty useless. I oppose lots of things as currently written, and then I rewrite them, and then I don't oppose them anymore.
That's been Heller's, by the way. You talked about Heller earlier. That's been his line throughout.
Right. Maybe it'll be awesome by the time I get to vote on it. Who knows?
Right.
But I was glad to see a lot of people. Yeah. Who knows what he might come up with, or what he might be allowed to offer in order to get his vote in the end. That's also a possibility. But usually you don't see senators from the majority being that, well, you never see them saying, I'm going to vote against the motion to proceed. That's almost always a given. And that was a pretty serious indication that they were not kidding about their opposition.
There are a lot of things that you've never seen before happening around this vote. Ron Johnson's anger toward McConnell for that Medicaid thing. And we were all shocked when Ted Cruz stood on the Senate floor and said, McConnell lied to me.
Yeah, that's true.
Which was shocking. That's not something that's done. But
it was true, but yeah.
Johnson talking to reporters about his lack of trust in McConnell, about how he feels let down, how he feels McConnell has lied to the whole caucus, is sort of on a par with what Cruz did.
I'll buy that.
And his questioning McConnell's leadership.
Yeah, that's not frequently done.
Not frequently done. I think McConnell has really burned a lot of bridges with this.
Okay.
And I think he's been lashing out in extremely punitive ways against Republican senators, and I think that's not helping a bit. The extending extending the work session into August was one of these punishing things, one of his punitive things. And, possibly directed pointedly at Dean Heller.
Wow.
Because Dean Heller is the guy who needs August recess the most, because he's the most vulnerable with an actual real opponent announced. He needs that time to campaign. I do think McConnell just was feeling in a pissy mood and mad at his conference, mad specifically at Heller, said, okay, here's 2 weeks less for you to campaign.
Well, that's a good lesson.
This insistence that we're going to have the vote anyway.
Yeah, that seems
and
like
it's going to be repealed anyway, and I am going to force you all to take this bad vote.
That's that also usually isn't done. That's usually the role of the majority leader in the Senate, is to stand by and take the heat for helping your caucus avoid those tough votes, and that's the sort of thing that makes them want to reelect you as leader.
Which is exactly how Harry Reid did it.
Well, almost everybody.
But everything about this process has been very much Mitch McConnell driving it, and Mitch McConnell trying to force his senators to do his will.
Yeah.
From not having any hearings, not having any committee process, leaving some of the committee members out of the process, leaving almost everybody out of the process, and saying, here, Adam Gentleson had just a fantastic long tweet thread about this process that I recommend everybody go read. It's linked in the story that I sent you.
Oh, okay.
About how unusual all of this has been.
Yeah.
And how reflective it is of McConnell's style. This is McConnell consolidating his own personal power. This is McConnell being the majority leader that he has always wanted to be. When he was elected to Senate, that was his goal.
Yeah, it's interesting that he doesn't seem to have the humility part of it down, and it's a real serious part.
The humility part of it down.
Yeah, we did read that tweet storm yesterday. It is pretty remarkable. It's just not like I was going to say. It's a good lesson in the reality of being in legislative political leadership, in the Senate in particular, because each senator just has so much ability to ruin things for everybody else, including the Senate leader. And you tend to think of the leader as the guy who gets to dictate policy all the time. But most people on the inside will tell you that almost every time they end up having to sort of take the pulse of the caucus and have that be the leadership position. It's very difficult to do it from in any other way. I mean,
well, and what McConnell tries to do is dictate the pulse.
Yes.
Gentleson had an addendum to his tweet storm. I don't know if you saw it yesterday, toward the end of the day, talking about Cornyn's role in all of this. And from his perspective, Cornyn, from what he has seen of how the two operate, Cornyn has been shut out of all of this. Okay. McConnell doesn't consult with him. He says, okay,
Yeah, well, he wasn't consulting. Whoops. Oh, dear. I think we've lost Joan suddenly. And I don't think I pressed any buttons either. Well, hopefully we'll have her back in a minute and find out that she dropped the bagel on the disconnect button, or hopefully nothing worse than that. That was getting interesting too. Yeah, well, I'll carry on in the hopes that you'll return quickly, and we'll see if we can't try and engineer a quick return ourselves here. But leaving Cornyn out of it, there was an awful lot of singular attempts anyway at singular leadership by McConnell here, just not taking any input from anyone. And like I said, this is a good reminder that leadership in the Senate is really about reflecting the will of your caucus. And a lot of times that's something that can only be measured in private. And as a result, it sort of looks like the leader is announcing a position that everyone is supposed to then stick to. But that's not always the case. It very often reflects a lot of discussion behind the scenes. Hi, welcome back, Joan.
I think Armando, I don't know what happened.
Oh, okay. Armando was thinking of joining us, and then I thought he said his mic wasn't working. Well,
ended up on a call with just him.
Oh, that's interesting.
But you kept the microphone, I'm assuming, so that's good.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Maybe I'm figuring maybe he called you instead of calling me. And did you press the button to connect him?
I did not.
Okay. So I don't know exactly what that was. I don't think that's possible any other way. So who knows? Okay. It's Armando's fault.
And I don't know what you were just talking
about.
Well,
I was following up on your point about Cornyn having been shut out of the process by McConnell.
At one point, Cornyn came out, it was last week, and said, we don't have a bill. I can't show it. And I don't know whether he was being snotty with reporters.
Yeah, I think so.
We're trying to see what the details were, but he said, we don't have a bill. I don't know what's in it.
Yeah. I think I read that one the way you did, the way you just hinted at was, they were saying, reporters saying, well, the bill is terrible. Well, it can't be terrible because technically we don't have a bill.
Terrible?
Right, we haven't written it down yet, or we haven't introduced it, and so therefore it's not a bill. Well, you have a draft. You know what's in it, you dummy. He might not have known exactly what was in it because McConnell was doing it in private. But, I also don't doubt he was trying to be snotty with reporters. Could have been both.
It could have been both. And, we have plenty of people who said, we have never seen this thing, we don't know what's in it.
Yeah.
Enough so that are probably really, really unhappy with McConnell right now.
Yeah, and
that he's going to force them to do this vote again.
Right.
And that they all have to troop up to the White House for another lunch with Donald Trump.
More food. Donald Trump and more food. No wonder.
My favorite thing out of the food story, other than the actual menu from Monday evening with the senators, was that Trump was clearly not aware of what was going on and kept pressing them on why they weren't putting in an amendment to sell insurance across state lines and bring down prescription drug prices.
That's right.
The stuff he talked about in the campaign. The only stuff he really understands in healthcare, because he's been talking about it for so long. Why aren't you doing that?
Yeah, I was surprised by that. I did see some tweets about it the other night that it was indicative of his just total disconnect from what's been going on. He's talking about things that haven't been discussed for months or things that were abandoned a long time ago.
That can't be in this bill.
Yeah.
If they're doing it by reconciliation.
Right.
Which is what they're doing. So I don't know how many times he's been told, sorry, we can't do it that way.
Yeah.
But clearly the message has not sunk in.
No. And as I was saying about it last night, it's like, it's because he is that dumb. He doesn't understand this stuff and there's no explaining it to him. And though other people were pointing out, well, there's also the element of even if he understood it, he would just say, I want it done. Don't give me excuses, because he thinks that works.
Exactly.
It works in his business where you can cheat any way you like.
I don't care. You don't say you can't.
Right.
You just do it.
Yeah. And then if it really can't be done, then you just lie and say it's finished already.
Yeah.
But, all right.
No, you lie and say it's the Democrats' fault.
Yeah. Well, that's an easy fallback. Yes. Absolutely true. But, who was it that was observing this stuff? There was a couple of people, I guess, just pointing out that he really had no command whatsoever of what was happening even in the meeting that he was having, much less what was happening in the process of trying to design this bill. Here we are. It was Margot Sanger-Katz who was tweeting, along with Burgess Everett observing, Trump asked senators how to lower prescription drug prices and sell insurance across state lines last night as the ACA repeal collapsed, per one of the senators who was there. And she remarking, it's really surprising how disengaged Trump apparently was from the policy details in the bill he was supposedly championing. And, of course, he lifted not a finger to champion anything because he couldn't be bothered to do any of that stuff. Laziest president we've seen in forever. And,
by the way,
there's
nothing preventing an insurance company from selling a policy across state lines.
Oh, well, that's good.
You can do that now. The only thing stopping it is that it's bad business.
So why don't we pass a bill to make it good business? How about that? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I suppose that's always possible. You can just, as long as you're willing to deal with the insurance commissioner of another state and all the complaints that could arise in a different state and deal with their legal system on top of everything, go for it. Okay. Because I'm pretty sure a lot of people do that. If you have, say, Aetna, I know, I'm in Virginia, I have Aetna. I bet there's somebody in another state that has Aetna.
I bet so.
They must be selling insurance across state lines.
Covered by Blue Cross Blue Shield of California.
Yes. And you're not even in California.
So,
how about that?
Hey.
Well, yeah.
Anywho.
Yeah, okay.
They're all trooping up there for lunch again today.
Lunch. And
I bet, once again, they forced Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski to sit next to him.
Oh. Well, at least they'll be close to one another. They can give each other eye rolls and stuff.
It hasn't worked so far, so hopefully they don't force them to do this again, because that's just cruel.
Oh, well. What is for lunch? Did you say you saw the menus from the other day? I'm curious.
I didn't see the menu for lunch, but what they were having at dinner looked good.
Lots of ketchup. Senator Hines, a frequent guest.
Summer vegetable succotash and rosemary grilled ribeye. Well done with ketchup.
Yeah, rosemary and ketchup. Well, ribeye's a tasty cut, but
yes,
what can you do? So he can't do any. Well, he can't do any governing period, and he's certainly not going to do anything without food. That guy never misses a meal, and I think it's pretty obvious. But he likes to do his working over the meals, by which I mean he likes to eat, and other people work around him, and then he says, "Look at all this I'm getting done here. I got 2 hands stuffing food into my face hole, and people are talking about politics or whatever." So that's good. He can
whatever he's talking about with Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, I wonder, that was a dinner, I guess, but was his
It was a dinner.
Back
it
at
was
the other table?
After all of the meetings of the day.
Yeah.
This was their private dinner with just their spouses and their translators.
Oh, the spouses were there.
Yeah.
Did he leave Melania behind at the table with the Japanese
I've seen some
Prime Minister?
pictures, and I believe Melania was sitting next to Putin.
Oh.
And Trump was across the table and a few seats down, but then moved over to talk to Putin.
Okay. Yeah, I was curious about the physical setup. I had heard that he was paired with Abe.
The interpreter that Trump had with him was a Japanese interpreter because he was sitting next to the Prime Minister of Japan.
Yes.
In the seating arrangement. Which is why there was not a Russian translator with Trump.
What did the Prime Minister of Japan, does anybody know what he did was he insulted? Did he say anything?
I imagine he was insulted.
I've
seen that the other leaders were absolutely befuddled about the fact that Trump was just getting up in this dinner, going over to Putin and sitting down and engaging in an hour-long conversation.
He is a wanderer. We have seen that.
He does wander.
Orange alert.
Now he wanders to the guy that he thinks is his friend.
I guess so. Who was he supposed to be talking to? Putin. What happened to that person?
I don't know who Putin was supposed to be talking to.
They were probably like, thank
probably.
God. This idiot's going to talk to Putin. I'm out of here. I wonder if he or she went to talk with poor Shinzo Abe with nobody to talk to. He brought it on himself by going to Mar-a-Lago.
I'm sure Abe was relieved.
Yeah, that might be too. He didn't get the cake. It was the Prime Minister or the President of China that got the cake. So, all right, well, maybe he thought he would get something out of it. So that was pretty astounding, and we'll never find out anything about what happened there because there's no other American on hand, except Melania, who I guess can't be forced to testify.
No. No.
But, all right, I wonder whether... I am curious about what, if anything, could have happened there. We may have been saved from another instance of treason by the fact that Trump might have, such a poor command of what he has under his control as president that he couldn't make a deal of any kind anyway. But I don't know. We might just have gotten together to talk about how great it was to have Miss Universe in Moscow in 2013 and how many electoral votes he won.
It's possible. Maybe he had a copy of the map that he wanted to make sure Putin saw because he wasn't sure he already had it.
Yes. He stole it off the servers. So, well, I don't know. Not too sure, but it has got the national security apparatus up in arms, and it is a big breach of national security protocol. It's just not something you can do anything about. The president gets to pretty much handle it, however he wants. Which, by the way, I did see, just as an aside for people with whom we've been talking about this for a long time, Ryan Lidza in the New Yorker finally committing to an article about all of what we've been discussing about Jared Kushner and his security clearance. That it really, because he is who he is, it won't matter. The president will give him a pass on everything anyway, and if he did, for some reason, have his security clearance pulled through the formal process, Trump as president would be fully within his rights to just say, I don't care, give him the briefing anyway, because all security clearance, I mean, all the apparatus we've set up for checking people's backgrounds and all of that is really just a proxy for the president's ability to make that decision on his own. And it looks better and really actually works better if professionals really do the vetting and make the recommendation. But all of it is basically an alternative method to the president simply saying, I control classification, and I say this person should get this. So even if the experts were to reject it, he could still have all the same information, and none of it would be illegal. Yep. But that's the terrible spot we've put ourselves in by giving this idiot the power of the presidency. We all thought he was just going to make great deals, but instead he's got the ability to pretty much ignore national security law whenever he feels like it, and you won't be able to hold him to account on most of that stuff till we get to the actual treason anyway.
And then it's going to take Congress to do it.
And so, you know those guys.
You're seeing articles about how they're finally souring on him. They're finally realizing how disconnected from anything that resembles governance he is. But I don't know if that's enough for them to actually turn on him. It's going to take a hell of a lot more than we've seen thus far.
I think that they consider that to be a benefit for the time being, although the next time around that a bill fails for lack of presidential leadership, which is always kind of a weird element to legislative work. There is a role there. They probably thought it would be a great thing if they were left to their own devices, but they're realizing now that sometimes it takes the president to push something across the finish line, and he's never going to be able to do that.
No. And never going to really want to. He just wants to sign stuff. He doesn't want to have to do the work that gets the bill to his desk.
Wow, does he love signing things.
He loves signing things. Bring out his mini desk and
I'm
totally don't understand. But
it may be a proportion thing with the hands, possibly.
Maybe he loves that little end table.
That is weird. I thought he would be, doing things at the Resolute desk as much as possible because it's so symbolic of the power of the presidency. But whatever, he's got weird ideas. He loves to sign things. We discussed this yesterday. As he's been telling people he's signed the most laws of any president ever. It's amazing. He lies like a kid.
He lies like a kid.
Lots of liars out there, but usually they're more sophisticated.
An 8-year-old kid.
Right. Yeah. I signed the most bills ever. And Santa Claus helped me. I don't know.
Because teenagers come up with much more creative lies.
Yeah. Right. Usually, well, never mind. I don't need to get into that. But they are more creative than Trump. And even the 8-year-olds are very often more creative than Trump. But, so he thinks he's signed the most bills of any president ever, and very far from true. And the ones he's signed mostly are crap. But he persists in that lie, even though he says he doesn't like Pinocchios. So, I don't know. Let's see. What other topics on the plate? I mean, it's been kind of all-consuming, the healthcare thing, and we're not sure it's dead, but that's... the House has been doing some additional work, and they've been... I don't know, but I forget what. It's so memorable.
It's not actually dead yet.
Yeah.
And I don't want anybody to feel relieved. I don't want anybody to stop keeping up the pressure.
True.
Because they are not going to stop trying to do shit with this. Pardon my French.
Okay.
Oops.
Was that French? See, okay. That'll be okay because the FEC doesn't regulate French.
Right.
For FCC. Neither does the FEC, by the way.
But it gets a lot more complicated after this.
Yes.
Because it's going to require, of course, 60 votes. Anything that they do after this.
For the time being.
For the time being. And what I'm curious to see is if McConnell has done so much damage to his own leadership within the caucus that they'd go along with this too. That in this whole repeal and replace fiasco, the zombie Trump Care 3.0, whether it's just been the final straw for them to say, okay, we're not going to follow you down this rabbit hole of breaking the Senate entirely.
That's a good question.
Yeah, I don't know.
There will be, as with most questions, there'll be division, I would guess, in their conference between people who say, yes, we can actually recover the initiative here by, say, eliminating the filibuster and doing all the policy changes that we wanted to do. And then there'll be others that say, well, now I'm less inclined than ever to give you this ability because you've squandered every opportunity you were handed under the regular rules, and you broke the regular rules, and now you want to break more of them. And why would I do that for somebody who's, A, incapable of any serious leadership, and B, also desperate on top of everything else for a personal win? And you just gave a big interview about how this whole thing has been about personal ambition. Maybe we don't want... I might be okay with changing filibuster rules, but I think maybe under a different majority leader. Yeah, it's possible. I don't know who they would replace him with or who is even capable of taking up the reins. There's not a whole lot of Republicans that I think both master the procedure and command the respect of a majority of the Republican conference.
Yeah, I don't think there's a lot of them.
Well, we were reading yesterday about the circumstances that brought McConnell to the leadership of the Republicans, and it involved a very rapid and sudden depletion of the Republican leadership bench in the Senate, and there really hasn't had much time to, to develop a new one. I mean, I imagine Cornyn is the kind of person who would imagine himself a natural successor.
Because Cornyn isn't all that bright.
Yeah, and sometimes people like that in their leader.
Yeah, sometimes it's easier. I think that you've probably got somebody like a Mike Lee envisioning this for himself.
That's likely true.
Who would be a serious contender, I think, because he is smart. I think you probably also have somebody like a Rand Paul seeing himself doing this because he's delusional. Yeah,
okay. All right. In that sense, yeah, he probably does see himself doing that.
I don't think you see Ted Cruz thinking he could do that. I mean, I'm sure Ted Cruz knows that he could do this.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
but I think he likes being in the bomb thrower position too much.
Yeah, maybe. And too many people still hate him, I guess.
Yeah. Pretty much everybody.
Cornyn might be a good compromise in the sense that it's sort of his turn, and Lee might say, all right, well, why don't I try and move to a whip position or get myself on the leadership ladder, and we'll tolerate Cornyn for a little while, and eventually he'll retire, and then I'll take it.
Yeah. That's what I foresee happening. But, of course, that means McConnell's out, and we don't know if that's going to happen yet. But you go back to Ron Johnson and his vehement anger. McConnell's leadership is breaking. We are seeing that.
And Johnson's not a terribly influential guy. It's not going to spread. But it is a thing.
And these defections, this is a big deal.
1 out of 52 is always a big deal. Because there's always someone else, too.
A minimum of 4 out of 52 now on the motion to proceed. It's a procedural vote.
Yeah, I mean...
How often do you see Republicans saying no to a procedural vote?
It's very rare. And
Republicans in the majority.
Yeah. You used to be able to get your legs broken on that, and it's not happening this time. And it's usually something that they can stomach doing, too. I oppose the bill in substance, and I'm going to do everything I can to improve it through the amendment process, but I can't get to the amendment process unless I vote for the motion to proceed, is the usual excuse. And it is an excuse, because your amendment is going to pass.
McCain has done that. This is the way that they always normally do this.
Yeah.
We don't like it, we'll vote for it, we'll try the amendment thing, our amendments won't work, but we can say we did it through quote-unquote regular order.
Yeah.
Which, McConnell is completely blown up. Yes. I don't know, did you see this yesterday?
Mm-hmm.
The announcement from Chairman Alexander that his help committee is going to hold hearings on health care after the Senate votes on the health care bill.
Oh, well, good. So finally, I did see some mention of hearings and that McConnell had said that maybe there would be some hearings, but it wasn't clear to me what they were supposed to be about. But okay. And so they would have a hearing on the bill after it fails?
Yes.
That is also unusual. That is not regular order.
I will consult with Senate leadership, and then I will set those hearings after the Senate votes on the health care bill.
Okay. That is backwards. Even from I'm Just a Bill and Schoolhouse Rock, we know that the hearings are supposed to come first.
Yes.
Well, I wonder if this helps them at any point with their reconciliation problems. I'm still astounded that this has gotten as far as it's gotten without anybody saying, hey, the reconciliation instructions say the Help Committee and the Finance Committee have to report these bills in order for them to be eligible for reconciliation, and they haven't done that. Why are we even talking about going forward under reconciliation? I would love to know what the reasoning, if any, is from the parliamentarian, why you no longer have to follow any of the reconciliation instructions and you'll still be taken seriously about moving a reconciliation bill to the floor.
I would like to know that, too.
Yes, I want to know how to do that next time. Because, that gets in the way. If you don't have to follow reconciliation instructions, that make it an interesting point of order.
You can just do anything.
Right. Well, this doesn't pass the Byrd rule. Well, so what? We're not paying attention to reconciliation rules. That was your decision last time. What? I never Yeah, you did. Nobody even had a hearing on this bill, much less reporting it, and you're scoring it and giving it a bird bath and everything. Why'd you even do that? Oh. Well, I don't know. That was a mistake. It won't help. They'll just say, well, all right. Well, we'll do it right this time. I don't know. I'm very puzzled by that one and would love to have the answer to that. But if the bill dies, I guess we never will.
And it's disturbing.
Yes.
Because, these rules they're very arcane and it's all just sort of background mumble jumble stuff that people don't care about. But it's kind of the backbone of how stuff works.
Yeah. And they used to be sticklers for that, and I don't understand that. I'd love to know.
It's kind of important for the Constitution.
Yeah.
For the foundations of the democracy, that the people who are upholding and defending it follow the rules they've established for themselves in doing so.
Yeah, it's troublesome when they don't do that. And troublesome when I can't get an explanation for why these things happen this way, because then it makes it more difficult to predict next time. Speaking of, I guess, of reconciliation instructions, I understand that there's now some question about whether or not Republicans will be able to put together an actual budget resolution next time around, that there actually is talk that they won't be able to nail anything down and get it through both the House and the Senate, which would, I guess, rob them of the opportunity of bringing a reconciliation bill next year, unless nothing matters.
Yeah, so. It's looking increasingly like that's going to be a problem. There's infighting in the House, there's infighting in the Senate, and there's fighting between the two chambers.
It's good to be consistent. Let's have fighting everywhere.
Yes. So, there's always the prospect that Republicans are going to shut down their own government.
Yeah, that was hinted at. We had a comment. One of our listeners, Kate Sherrill, had sent a Politico article, and I opened it and I saw Patrick McHenry, and my computer shut down immediately. But I've opened it back up, and something's going on. I haven't had a chance to read the article, but I guess this would be a shutdown threat again? Where is this coming from?
From the usual place, of course.
Mm-hmm.
The Freedom Caucus.
Okay.
But there are other problems. They had their big budget release yesterday, which was very funny, that nobody was paying attention to Paul Ryan releasing his budget again because of the implosion of Trump care on the Senate side. One of the problems that they've got in this budget is that it assumes Obamacare repeal.
Whoops. Okay. Well.
Whoops. So they kind of have to go back and rework that. Of course, it includes Medicare privatization again.
Mm-hmm.
And massive, massive entitlement cuts that reach into Social Security, too.
Okay.
So, more cuts to Medicaid, cuts to Social Security, privatizing Medicare. All of Paul Ryan's regular shtick. Going along as if nothing happened on the Senate side with Trump care.
Well, yeah. And that probably is the best explanation for it, as you've said. It's his regular shtick. It's just the same thing. He's such a wonk. He understands this stuff so intimately that he just introduces the same budget every year and loses it. And, although I guess the new twist is assuming the actual repeal of Obamacare, but generally the same thing as always. I see in the caption to the picture with Patrick McHenry, and it's him in his capacity as chief deputy whip, telling Republican lawmakers in their Tuesday morning meeting that they've broken the record for the most undecided responses on the question of the budget. They've never had more Republicans say they were undecided on a Republican budget proposal than they have now. So I guess that's interesting. I guess that's progress backward, but for them, but to my mind, good forward progress.
We're going to be operating on a continuing resolution for the next 7 years.
I would guess so. And there's no...
Maybe just 4.
Oh, yeah, right. True, although it's entirely possible that no one ever takes the budgeting process seriously again, and we just operate on continuing resolutions until somebody passes a new budget act or something. It seems to be beyond the capacity of a pretty significant portion of members of Congress elected in the last 10 years, essentially. They don't really have a great deal of experience with always passing a budget. And I would, this is a great research topic. What percentage of Congress, members of Congress currently, have had a majority of their experience in their tenure in Congress during years in which the regular appropriations process gets finished?
Wow.
I would guess that there's
in
probably
the House,
fewer
it's
than
be very few.
Yeah, I mean, I would guess probably less than 15 or maybe even 10% of members of the House have ever seen 13. Are we 13 or 12? These we'll go back up to 13. 13 regular appropriations bills passed. Even where a couple of them have been combined into a omnibus. But we've had lots of continuing resolutions, and then one big omnibus, minus occasionally they pass like the Veterans Affairs appropriations bill. But or even I guess where the majority of the appropriations bills have been passed as standalone measures. I don't think that's been done for a decade.
I don't think it has. That sounds like a very good research project.
Oh my God, somebody else do that. It's so good I can envision myself not wanting to finish it.
But it's a good question. Goes back to having a regular order in Congress.
Yeah. And everybody promises
having the I'm just a bill process actually followed. I mean, how many of these guys have actually sat through a committee hearing that was serious?
Oh, well, that's true.
A fact-finding committee hearing that ended up resulting in legislation that then went through a markup procedure where they came back to it and refined it passed it out of committee, sent it to the next committee in charge of that issue, if there is one, or to the floor for the process there, where it might be debated, where the rules committee would decide, okay, we can consider amendments like this, and then it goes to the floor, and they've actually done their regular job all the way through. I wonder how many have done that.
Not as many as you would imagine, I guess. You would imagine it correctly, I think, but that's an odd thing that so many of them, they might not even know what regular order is. They know they like to say they want it, but they don't have very much experience with it. I imagine also very few of them have ever sat on a conference committee either. That's fallen by the wayside as well. That's
it's all decided by leadership.
Yeah, that's true. And every time someone runs for a leadership position, they do so on the promise of returning to regular order.
Yes.
It never happens. Regular order is tough.
You're seeing the results of that right now in the Senate.
That's another good point and a good connection. You don't normally see, as we mentioned earlier, anybody voting against, anybody from the majority voting against procedural measures. And I guess there's probably a pretty strong correlation between instances of voting against your leadership on procedure and departures from regular order. The longer it's been since you did things the normal way, the more likely there is A, frustration with the way you did do things, and B, less ownership in the product, and so less inclination to vote with the majority leadership on procedure. I don't care about passing this thing. I have nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
Well, it's a big political science project, and definitely make for good
one that
research.
I would love to take on.
I would love to see it done. I'm pretty sure what
have to figure out healthcare and net neutrality.
Yes, right. Well, we do. We always have to keep an eye on that, and they're not dead yet. The two biggest zombies. How did you get the two zombie things?
I know. How did that work out?
You'll just never get out from underneath it. Other people get to finish their assignments. Huh. Well,
I guess I'm just lucky.
Yeah, I guess so. And it requires the ability to understand the procedure, because there's been very little else but procedure, around. There's lots of substantive proposals, but a lot of them die, and you got to understand the procedure in order to be able to explain that. Tell me nothing's happening on net neutrality at the moment, but that can't be true, right?
Well, I've just opened up a story at Ars Technica. FCC refuses to release text of more than 40,000 net neutrality complaints. Ajit Pai says there's no net neutrality problem, but keeps complaints under wraps. So our Federal Communications Commission is not communicating.
Right. That's an odd problem for them to have. So, I assume, do they normally, I guess they normally just open up the archives. Nobody probably looks, because 40,000 complaints, yuck.
Yeah.
But take a stab in the dark, see if you can come up with something fun.
It's Ajit Pai saying, no, there's no problem. We don't need this open internet order because this never happens, because it's not an issue.
Okay.
Because he's hiding the 40,000 complaints about how net neutrality is not being enforced.
Yeah.
Or complied with.
Well, okay. Typical Republican trick, I suppose, on that. But yeah, we know that that's a threat they renew daily, and we always have to keep an eye on it, and we're constantly hearing that, that too has become a zombie.
And it's important to recognize the victories that we've had there, just like it's important to recognize the victory in killing Trump Care.
Yeah.
The incessant pressure that these folks received from their constituents had to help. It had to help.
Yeah, and hopefully that'll sustain you through the fact that these do seem to be zombie issues, and it's very easy, I would assume, for us to, like with so many things, get to the point where we say, what's the difference? It keeps coming back, but
the fact is, we won net neutrality.
Yeah,
we're going to have to defend it, but we won it. But here's the other key thing that we did. Democrats are now completely united behind us. We don't have to fight within our own coalition to keep net neutrality.
That is a pretty big
and that's sadly a victory, but it is a victory.
Yeah. And a necessary one. I mean, it reminds me how often any of you who've spent any time, well, anywhere really, online, but on Twitter in particular, where the subject can range all over the place and change directions at any given moment, thinking about all the complaints, many of them entirely valid, about, what, for lack of a better term, gets labeled neoliberalism. It was a huge problem in organizing, and still remains a huge problem in organizing the Democratic Party. It would be very, very easy in light of that discussion to imagine that it could still be a tremendous problem to get to get uniformity among Democrats on an issue like net neutrality, where there's so many corporate dollars at stake and corporate policy standing in pretty clear opposition to where we've come to rest as a party. You'd think that there would be a lot more, and it may be that there are a lot of Democrats who wish they could be more sympathetic that way because they could raise a lot more money that way. But it's a pretty remarkable accomplishment that you've made it impossible for them to occupy that space, which is really what you wanted. You deserve a tremendous amount of credit for that.
Absolutely.
All you people.
Well, and in the healthcare fight, look at how standard a response it is now to say, yeah, we need some form of single payer. We've got to have a public option.
Mm-hmm. And as much
pretty
work
much
as
all
there
of them
is,
are saying that now.
Yeah, as much work as it is to actually formulate that policy, and as much as needs to be done, that it's a great thing that that's a rote
over the hurdle
response.
of convincing them that it's necessary.
Yeah, or shying away from it, or even if they don't say single payer necessarily, there's still some people who fear that and don't like to utter those words, but they're certainly more comfortable talking about, well, let's talk about perhaps Medicaid expansion and Medicaid for all, or something very much like that, which is, okay, fine, it's the same thing if you really think about it, and you're afraid to say that, then say this. That's pretty good too.
Which goes to show just how critical to this whole thing Medicaid expansion was.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that Democrats realized it, but I think Republicans did.
Yeah.
I think that's why it's the centerpiece of what they're trying to do.
Yeah, that is interesting. And that
and they just hate poor people.
Well, yeah.
People.
Right.
Or the working poor. Or
you do get some extraordinary.
And it has been Paul Ryan's dream since his frat parties.
What kind of parties did that guy go to? I can't imagine.
Really awful ones.
I guess so. Holy cow. It's just the idea of thinking that much about any policy at all really is kind of surprising, but to be like,
He's a sociopath.
Let's rob poor people of any hope to even survive our government. Okay. That's a great idea. Let's drink to that one. I don't know. That's kind of odd. I guess, as you were saying, the Republican realization of the importance of the Medicaid expansion reminded me of the Capito comment of, I'm still struck by the idea that a Republican would say out loud, I didn't come to Washington to hurt people. That's amazing. What a fantastic, I mean, it's nice. You should be saying that all along, but
it's like a light bulb went off over her head.
Yeah. Why did I come here? Now that I think about it, I mean, that's all they do as Republicans anyway, but all of a sudden this one really stuck with her. And it's one of the inherent contradictions of representing a culturally conservative poor state, though. Yeah. And I'm amazed she actually figured it out, which is smarter than I give her credit for, or at least better at PR.
Or, scared.
Yeah. That's fine. That works.
It works.
Ugh. All right. Well, let's see. Anything else on the horizon?
What else have we got? Right. It's mostly going to be Trump care Russia today because because it's hard to get away from. But there are other things coming. We've got Rohrabacher in Russia.
Yeah. What the hell's wrong with that guy? I have something open on him that I guess I saw fly by. He's working hard to try and reverse the sanctions. But boy, he keeps cropping in every. I guess it's no surprise. It's a coordinated plan. But every time we find out something new and shocking about the coordination between Russians and the Trump campaign, even though I don't recall Rohrabacher being particularly involved in the Trump campaign per se. He was clearly a Trump fan, but I mean, he was busy with his own reelection. But all of a sudden, he turns up everywhere.
Yeah. He this is just crazy. He had gone to Russia, to Moscow, was given a secret document by officials there, came back and set up a hearing, or tried to set up a hearing on Capitol Hill to get rid of sanctions.
Yeah.
So
Magnitsky was related to this.
Yeah. So he's he's the mole in the house. And he's not even a mole, because he's not doing any of this secretly.
Even Kevin McCarthy knows that he's on the payroll, even though he now tries to pretend that was a joke. That was a pretty remarkable turn of events. I mean, he said that, and everybody laughed at him for other reasons, not because he was joking, but because he, I guess, had said out loud what they all
I think it was
think
nervous
is true.
Laugh.
And, another reminder, you can't have too many reminders, that Paul Ryan knew just what to do right there, basically exposing all the collusion at once and saying, well, because we're Republicans, let us all vow not to tell anyone about this collusion because we're family, and that means we're all benefiting from this collusion and interference. So let's all remember to be quiet or we all go down.
Yep.
So great move there. But, so Rohrabacher taking the lead in trying to repeal the Magnitsky Act, and he keeps getting himself, keeps finding himself in the middle of all of these things, and even traveling to Moscow to pick up the dossier. Why they don't bring that here, I don't know. They're the ones that want the favor.
Yeah.
But I guess he gets some free dinners out of it. But they could take him out to dinner here. What's wrong with that?
I don't know. I don't know.
The FBI tracks his movements here. That must be it. The FBI knows who he's having dinner with because they're able to follow him here, and they're having a more difficult time tracking his movements in Moscow, I guess. Maybe that's it.
It's not, though, that he makes any attempt to not be obvious in doing this.
True. It does say here that he took Steven Seagal with him on the 2013 trip. That's hard to hide.
I'm still having a really hard time getting over the initial hurdle that Republicans love Russians now.
It is very weird. Didn't used to be the case, and not all of them were on board with it until recently either. I guess until they realized, oh my gosh, we won this election because of Russia, now we have to swallow Russia as friendly somehow. I mean, but during the campaign, most Republican members of the House and Senate regarded Russia the way we have always traditionally regarded Russia.
Yeah.
So why they weren't shocked to find this out, I don't know. But that was probably one of the most surprising developments in politics overall, is that how quickly, I guess it's to be expected, people stick with their team, etc., and will defend almost anything.
Right.
But it's
as long as they win.
Yeah. You couldn't pick a starker example.
There's an interesting story, though, in Just Security that might be the beginning of an end to that. And I just sent it to you.
Okay, let's take a look.
Did Trump campaign collude with Russia to defeat Republican opponents in the GOP primary?
Ooh, that is an interesting twist.
Yeah. And, sure, winning is everything, but if it's Russia interfering within our own Republican Party business, are we okay with that?
Yeah.
Sure, we can hand over the running of the country to them, but this was our primary.
They would be impeaching Hillary Clinton if it came out that she had helped, and whoever it was defeat, if she had sent Oppo research on Trump to Jeb Bush, if he ever, made a showing for whatever reason, and had then become, had defeated him, like in not Bizarro world, everybody's like, oh, I just heard the Access Hollywood tapes. You're out. We're getting a different guy. But if it had turned out that that opposition research had come from Hillary Clinton, they would have considered that. I don't know whether they would have thought it was. They think everything is impeachable.
Lock her up. Lock her up.
Yeah, absolutely. They would have invented some reason for believing that was somehow illegal. Just as they're now inventing this whole thing about anybody would take these meetings. You get opposition research handed to you all the time by Americans.
From
yes,
Russia.
Right. Right. Exactly. The Martians are giving us our opposition. Oh, there's nothing illegal about that necessarily. But this concept that anybody would take this meeting, which is really a startling admission, which is to say that they don't care where anything comes from, legal or otherwise, but I think is just meant to latch onto everybody's typical understanding that usually the people you'll be getting your research from and meeting with are Americans, and so there's nothing inherently, certainly nothing illegal about it. Whereas it's explicitly illegal to accept things of value contributed to your campaign by foreign nationals. I don't know why they keep insisting that's not true. Just hoping you'll believe it.
Not a puppet.
Yeah, right. Between that and the secret additional meeting at dinner, it's very hard to shy away from the no puppet thing. He actually literally pulled you across the table down to his seat. And it should be noted for people, remember, traditionally we've watched the physical movements of Russians for a long time, to try to interpret what it was they were doing in their government and as foreign policy. Criminology was all based on, where people would be positioned versus, vis-a-vis the Soviet premier back in the day. So the idea that sitting at a long table full of world leaders, the guy who gets up and comes to the other one's seat is our president going to Putin. Putin just sort of sitting there getting his ring kissed, and our president comes skulking around to try to get a conversation. Haven't really given much thought to how alpha that is, but okay. See, once again, okay with the Republicans, because now they love Putin. I do not understand that.
One of the targets apparently was Rubio.
Oh. They had something good on him?
So you would hope that Rubio would be a little concerned about this.
Meh. He'll find a way to not be.
Apparently they tried to target Cruz with a sex scandal, which I don't think ever
with a can of soup?
Rose up above the din. Probably because nobody wants to imagine Ted Cruz and sex.
That did come up at some point, didn't it? Somebody raised that specter. I wonder if that was what they were talking about. But then I guess seeing him even his own relationship with his own wife, or the way he dealt with her. I mean, he was bonking her on the head.
There was the soup thing.
Yeah, right. The 100 cans.
That came from him.
Yeah, that was his own research on himself. He was trying to humanize himself. That didn't work. But yeah, the idea that he was going to be a smooth operator with some other women when he kept accidentally elbowing his wife in the nose and couldn't even plant a TV kiss on her cheek without banging skulls. Seems pretty odd. But I don't know. Somebody says that he's thinks himself something of a suave guy, or back in the day in debate anyway. I guess more rumors of people wandering the halls in bathrobes. Yeesh. Yeah, that didn't stick.
At any rate, it's an interesting story.
Yeah.
I think Mark's going to be taking a deeper look at it, but interfering within their primary might be a bridge too far.
Maybe. Maybe, unless they're just willing to take, maybe they're all puppets. I don't know. Or they all think that there's some piece of the action that they can get. And it's not entirely clear that there's any prize in it for Trump. I mean, obviously, winning the presidency is a great prize, but he's unable to actually do anything with it policy-wise. And these guys love policy. He just loves money, so it's simple enough. Trump can just take his emoluments and run. And I guess that would be enough for most people. In the end, if you were really going to get millions of dollars out of it. Just as anybody would take a meeting with the Russians to take their opposition research, wouldn't anybody accept millions of dollars in bribes from Russia? I mean, any of them anyway?
Yeah.
I guess that they would.
It's all kind of fun to speculate about, but it is important to tie things together, like Kobach and his voter suppression list.
Yes.
And the fact that they're ready there. They've figured out how to do this, the Russians have, and it's going to happen in 2018 too.
Yeah, well, there's no reason not to.
And clearly, with Trump in office, we're not going to have a response from the federal government.
Oh, no. Well, they're closing all of the federal offices that might have anything to do with combating it as well.
Yeah.
The State Department closing various things, including, by the way, their war crimes division, which I think we still have war crimes in the world.
I think war crimes still exist. I think America's not going to care about them.
No, well, we're not going to be
easier to
that.
Yeah.
But,
so anyway.
Yes. Well, good things to think about. Sort of, in the sense that we know they're coming, and they're horrible things to have to think about, but they're valuable to have in mind. We'll put it that way.
You know, it's worth folks talking to the governors and secretaries of state and elections officials about how safe the vote is in their states.
Yeah,
it is one place where states' rights, where our federation is kind of important. If states can look out for these things in lieu of the federal government doing it.
Yeah. They're going to have to figure out a way to raise the money necessary to do that, as I assume the Trump administration not only does nothing, but probably does less than ever before in terms of assisting them. And that's the difference between a legitimate government and the Trump administration. They won't be providing states any of the resources they need to prevent this, because this is how they win. Not realizing, of course, that I suppose if they ever fall out of favor with the Putin regime, they could be how they lose as well. But you
don't want to be too alarmist about all of these things, but this is kind of alarming.
Yeah.
And
I would say so.
We kind of need to be prepared. Protect the vote is more important, I think, for 2018 than it's ever been.
Well, we ought to set about the unpleasant task of trying to focus on how we do that in the face of still more Russian opposition and a friendly so-called American administration in charge of doing that. Somebody who's sitting at the levers who has every reason to want to continue to collude and to avoid any punishment for anything that they happen to uncover, and certainly will do nothing to prevent it from happening. They think they're benefiting from it, and the guy holds all the keys on national security and state secrets and classification and pardons. That's a pretty awful combination to have in the hands of somebody who's supposed to be protecting the integrity of the vote. Any crime you uncover, he can forgive and declare not to be a crime in the first place.
But more importantly, he's turned loose all of the people who are going to make it as hard as possible for the majority of people to vote.
Yeah, and under color of some strange and still unstated authority as well.
Yeah.
Very weird. I'm glad to see some of the state secretaries of state resisting in some
including
respect.
Idaho's.
Yes, good.
Out yesterday. So, yeah.
Yeah, that part they have traditional
this is where your
republicanism
states are important. This is where, he got a lot of backlash from people. He heard from a lot of constituents. The Democratic Party here sued. So,
fight. Right. Another of those fights on which we can at least have some hope of winning. I suppose if we can defeat the repeal of Obamacare, or at least temporarily and hopefully forever, then I suppose there's hope for undoing the Kobach Commission's mission somehow too. It's hard to see my way clear to it at this point, but honestly, all that time spent on
somebody like
repeal.
a state elections official or a secretary of state is going to feel a lot more pressure back home from voters.
Yes, they can't hide quite as easily.
A President Trump. So call everybody.
Yeah. I guess that's probably it. We'll have to, that's another assignment for us, the Daily Kos guide to who to call to complain about the various important issues.
Yeah.
Run down your checklist. Okay. Well, it gives us an idea for the future. Speaking of which, it's time for us all to get back to posting so that you can read about the next big breaking shocker of an event that might have happened while we were on the air. Who knows what the president has tweeted or what's in his draft folders at this very moment.
He's getting ready for lunch.
Oh, yeah. That could be it. He's got a lot of people coming over.
I don't think he's very good at multitasking, so
no,
he's probably sitting down with people telling him, don't ask about selling insurance across state lines again.
Yeah, that's right. Here's a little cue card. Right on the back of his ketchup packets. Just had this vision of him squeezing out individual packets and said, well, we should get a bigger container for this ketchup. I don't understand why I have to spend so much of my presidential time at the Resolute desk squeezing out ketchup packets. Surely Obama had somebody.
Could be signing things.
Yeah, bring me a Diet Coke and something to sign. Ugh. All right. Well, thanks very much for coming by and updating us on this. At least we had some good news to go with, and there's usually some progress we're making on some front. It was fun to sort of celebrate the at least outward PR failure of the Obamacare repeal effort, and hopefully we can continue doing that next week.
Hopefully we can, and hopefully Armando will come back and
yeah,
talk to you again.
Right, I know. Next time he'll have his microphone working. We might have to get him a new mic at some point. Or some people may, if you want to contribute to keep us from giving him a new mic, that is also a possibility too. Well, we're open to that. Just kidding, of course. Thanks, Joan, for coming by. We'll talk with you next week and see where the world brings us by then. Who could even tell?
Bye-bye.
Bye. Take care. Joan McCarter, our senior political writer, on her way back to the written arm of the Daily Kos worldwide empire. We, of course, now turn the Netroots Radio airwaves over to the guys getting ready to bring you the after show and catch you up on anything we may have missed in all of this. What do they got for today's Wednesday show? The Montana lawmaker who issued a guilty plea for body slamming a reporter, remember him, he's actually a member of Congress now, fights a court order to be fingerprinted and photographed. That kind of goes along with the guilty plea. What's the fight about? Federal government officials canceled a planned meeting between Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg and a top government climate researcher to discuss the science behind the rapidly melting ice sheets at Glacier National Park. And the outgoing director of the U.S. Office of Ethics and Government reveals Trump didn't want to sign his own financial disclosure verifying it was true. I guess he eventually did, but what a weird situation. We'll find out more about that.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Thank you for listening, and again, do stay tuned for the after show with Wink and Justice coming up next. By the way, on the last half of their program, they'll be visiting with Angela Marks, a.k.a. Angie in Washington State. You may know her from Twitter that way, for a political and world news roundup so sorely needed after our micro investigations.